Welcome back to Justice for the series. I'm attorney Gerald Griggs along with my co-host Keandra Damone, and we are here for an exciting episode, but also a somber one. A 14-year-old boy's life was taken over perceived violation of a legal system that protected the guilty.
A mother who forced the world to face the truth in a case that started an entire movement but never got justice.
Every headline fades. Every news cycle moves on. For the families, it never ends. And the fight for accountability continues. This is not about clicks. This is not about controversy. This is about the truth. The names that deserves justice. We are reopening and examining the files and the facts. Nothing more and nothing less. We're going to ask questions that people dare to ask. Because justice delayed does not mean justice denied.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Can't fail me.
You don't get
This is Justice for.
So, growing up, you knew one name was synonymous with injustice, one name that haunts you as a Black man, and that name was Emmett Till. And so when we started this podcast, I thought that there was one case that we needed to highlight and have a real conversation about, and that's the case of Emmett Till. I'm sure many of you know what happened to Emmett back in August of 1955, but we want to delve a little bit deeper into what happened to Emmett Till and how Mamie Till made sure that the nation saw what happened to her baby boy. And so tonight on Justice for the series, we're going to dive deep into justice for Emmett Till. Again, this is one of those cases where, as a little boy, I was always brought into remembrance of what happened to him. And it is part of the duty of being a civil rights activist to make sure we lift up this case. So I'm honored to introduce the cousin of Emmett Till, Deborah Watts, who's also the executive director of the Emmett Till Foundation. And I'm honored to have her here. But we're going to transition into talking about her case in a few minutes, but I just wanted her to introduce herself to the people. Ms. Watts.
Attorney Griggs, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now.
But I could not hear you at all, unfortunately. So I see you unmuted my mic, and I'm not quite sure if you asked a question. If that could be repeated, I could hear Andrea, but I couldn't hear you at all. So I'm so sorry.
Okay, well, I'm going to kick it over to Keandra, and she'll introduce you.
First of all, no apologies necessary. This is a live episode. Things happen. We are here to be human. We are here to talk about a human, and we are here to discuss how, as humans, we can continue his legacy. And you, right now, are a face for his legacy. You are a representative for so much that is still affecting this country. So we want to give you the opportunity to speak just about what that looks like for you, to say, hey, I'm the founder. Well, I'm the founder and I'm the executive director, or I am the leader of this foundation. But what does that look like for you? What does that look like for your family?
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor and a privilege, to stand in the gap, for my family, and along with some of my family members as well. We started the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation on the 50th anniversary of Emmett's murder. So, of course, we just celebrated or commemorated 70 years. So for the first 47 years of of the demise, of the lynching. Emmett's mother um, fought for those years. And then after her voice silence, we decided as a family to come together to use our skill to find out what we could do, to amplify, you see, to speak about her and to continue. We certainly could not walk in her shoes, as a mother. Unfortunately, she had no siblings and Emmett had no siblings. So most of us are cousins who are trying to stand up for truth, justice, and accountability, which is what she was all about as well. And so, in our own way, we established the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. Cousins, family members, ambassadors, and others who have joined us to move things forward in this country as Emmett's mother did, and to try to be a of moving justice forward, not only for Emmett, but also for other family members as well. And so it just is a privilege and an honor for us to uh, speak about Emmett, talk about the humanity, his humanity, the courageous footsteps that his mother took, and then also this justice journey we've been on since 2005. And so, what it looks like to us is a continuous effort, one where the through line has certainly started before Emmett, with Emmett, and certainly after, unfortunately. And so, I thank you all for the opportunity to do this. And again, I stand on the shoulders of so many others, particularly Mamie Till-Mobley, who summoned me in 1989 to join her at the dedication of the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, where I saw like Julian Bond, people like Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks, and so many others, Ralph Abernathy, many others, and young people too, that were standing up at that time. But the Southern Poverty decided to erect this monument with the names of about 40 different martyrs from the civil rights era, and Emmett's name was one of them. And so his mother, summoned some of us. She said, with me, come with me on this journey. And we did. But we watched her stand 10 toes down, broad shoulders, with all the dignity, beauty, and care that she had, not only for giving a voice, for Emmett, but also a voice for others. And so I was just in that, and that's how, and um, figuring out, trying to figure out where I would fit. And she certainly wanted all of us to fit, but we can't, we could not step in those big shoes that she left for us. So we are trying, and so far, if years, I'll tell you, with the resources that we have and the journey that we've been on, it's been pretty humbling, but it's also been eye opening, and it's also been one that we figured the struggle is not over. I don't know if that
Absolutely.
answered your question or not,
It does.
but
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I want to, because it's so rare that we have access to a direct relative of someone with such a monumental legacy. And as Greg said, this is a story that we grew up as Black people hearing, almost like, for lack of a better term, a horror story. But in the age of the internet, and with so many different narratives circulating, we hear so many different things. So I also want to use this as an opportunity to ask you directly to tell us, if I'm just hearing about Emmett Till for the first time, tell us what happened, what is the story, and how it turned into an entire movement in this country.
Yes, well, it gives me honor to talk about it, but I'll tell you, it takes me and some of other family members down this other path, right, on an emotional path. So you have to forgive me. But Emmett Till, first of all, was a young, beautiful young man who had just turned 14. July 25th, 41 was when to visit cousins in Mississippi. And most of us, most of our ancestors and those that have gone before me, because I was a toddler at the time when Emmett was murdered, but we oftentimes went back to Mississippi for visits with relatives. And he took advantage of that opportunity to go with some cousins to visit. It was like August 24th at the time when he was early August or mid August when he arrived. But about the 24th of August, he had an opportunity to go to a store, Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. And there he bought some items and with some of the cousins, was in the atmosphere. And upon his exiting the store, well, he went in with no incident, bought his items, exited. But for some reason, as witnesses tell us, when Carolyn Bryant Donham, who was one of the store owners, walked out, she was unhurried, was undisturbed, nothing was going on. Actually, you'll hear stories that say something a little bit different, but Emmett actually did whistle at her. And so that startled all of the other relatives, all the other boys that were with her, and a couple girls that were with them as well. And they got out of there, and promised, not to talk about it because they understood the mores, the laws, the unwritten rules in Mississippi. And they knew that, Emmett was having a good time. And if the relatives knew what was happening, he would probably be sent right home. Well, a few days later, on August 28th, in 1955, Emmett was actually abducted by Carolyn Bryant's husband and his half brother, J.W. Milam. They abducted him, they kidnapped him, and we believe there's one other person that was with them at the time. Actually, more than one other person, but we truly believe that Carolyn Bryant Donham actually identified him that night because someone he was brought to her and was identified, and that's why they actually did abduct him. A few days later, without knowing what happened to him, Emmett's body emerged in the Tallahatchie River with a 75-pound cotton gin fan tied around his neck. Emmett had been beaten, he had been tortured, and he had been lynched at that time. And so, this is a tragedy, that just struck the country, tore a hole in the heart of Emmett's mother, her only son, his demise, his killing, the rest of the family as well. There were relatives, Mose Wright, whose home he was in. My cousin Elma Spearman, who's Mamie's mother, that was her sister, Elizabeth Wright, left. She left town, and many others did as well because they knew trouble was coming. But about September 19th or so, there was actually a trial. They actually held J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant, and they, I would say I think they charged him with murder. And, at that time, just think about it. This is 1955, shortly after Brown versus Board of Education, the segregation of schools became law, if you will. People were up in arms about what was going on. And so there's a reign of terror that went through Mississippi shortly after that, and even before that. But it just was to a whole different point.
Things.
And so Emmett became, as Emmett's mother has said, a sacrificial lamb. He represented, I think, to white people there and white supremacy and the Jim Crow laws, was something that they had to do. They had to put him in his place. And that meant that he had to die, and so his mother decided, afterwards they wanted a quick burial of Emmett. And she decided she wanted his body back in Chicago. She was successful in getting his body back, and she decided to have an open casket funeral, a funeral that was I would say it was witnessed by thousands in Chicago. And then because she was just, I think, strategic in bringing together media, bringing together politicians, and actually writing to the president and leaders, in politics in our country to the highest level, of our country, bringing the attention, to Emmett's kidnapping and also his murder. She was standing up at that time in her grief and in her pain, but she decided to have that open casket funeral and wanted the world to bear witness to what hate looked like. And so, as you talked about a horror story and talked about, it was sort of a horror story, it became a horror story for the country. But it also, I think, was a charge, a spark that put the fire under many men, women, children, and others. There's the Emmett Till generation that stood up as well. But at any rate, it was an opportunity, I think, for us to say enough is enough in our country and we must do something. And so if you know the rest of that story, she spent years fighting for justice for Emmett, facing being promised by a lot of hopeful, I think, attorneys to reopen that case. Unfortunately, she died in 2003 without it being reopened. And then the rest is the work that we've, done going forward, and from others who've been very courageous in standing up for Emmett. For
So can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I wanna kind of pull back a little bit. You gave such a great synopsis of the story, but I kind of want to talk about Emmett the boy before we go into what happened to him. Can you give us some more background on who Emmett Till was as a boy?
Yes. Well, Emmett was the only child. Yeah, he was born July 25th, 1941, to Mamie Till-Mobley, young mother, who began raising him pretty much alone because his father was sent off to war, and so he didn't have a lot of time with his dad. So as a single mom, um, but loved, he was surrounded by love, surrounded by family. His grandmother, Alma Spearman, who was sort of this leader, this woman uh, leader who made sure that our family was good once we started migrating from Mississippi to Chicago, to California, to Nebraska, and other places. And that's where I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. And
Mhm.
so, but in a small community there in Argo, Illinois, or Summit, Illinois, is where Emmett first began his upbringing, if you will, and was surrounded by love. He actually grew um, beyond some health issues that he faced at, I believe, the age 5, 6 years of age. He had polio, and he had this stutter that he was challenged with. And so many times, in speaking, he was challenged, but his mother taught him some things. She was very, loving, caring mother, but taught him how to whistle, taught him how to, pronounce his words. And so that didn't stop him. He became a jokester, fun loving. And some of my cousins who actually lived with him said he was a protector as well. But
Mhm.
he was his mother's helpmate, almost like brothers and sisters. I have an elderly aunt that I've been speaking with recently, and she
Mhm.
said, "Oh, she said she just adored him. They adored each other, but they had this relationship like brother and sister." And so it was one of those things where he took advantage of, helping, took advantage of the opportunity when he was alone, was working, would wash clothes,
Mhm.
would clean the house. So he was very dutiful, if you will, responsible, and smart, intelligent, didn't give her any trouble. But he did like to joke and like to play around like any, young person would. And
Yeah.
so,
Like any
for,
14-year-old.
I'm sorry.
I said like any 14-year-old. Yes.
Yeah. And so even so I'm just describing like even before 14, because 14 was at the time he was unfortunately murdered. and Lynch. But this was even, coming up to that time. So he had a lot of love. I don't think, just living in that small community he was insulated by love, care, um, family, felt a sense of protection. Moved later, to a community in Chicago. But again, he had the wide open spaces there. He had amusement parks and other things. So as any 14-year-old, or someone that was coming into his own, that's who Emmett was. There's some work that we did with MoveOn.org, and we held a rally a few years ago, and we wanted to humanize him. So we had these beautiful images of him as a cook, as a comedian, as a peacemaker, and those are images that we'll, hopefully in the future you'll be seeing those, because we want to do, an exhibit that actually identifies these things, from his youth, to unfortunately what happened, but then now, what his death has sparred and spurred us, to do. But yeah, that's who he was. One other thing, I've done some recent talks with some corporations and leaders and attorneys and others, but I describe it, he had swag. If you see pictures of him, he had a little style. He loved to dress, and he was, I don't know if you know this term, spoiled, but that's one of what one of my aunts was saying about him. But he loved it. They loved to spoil him. He loved that, being cared in that way, and was just a beautiful young man that had hopes and dreams, that were, diminished, or not even, but just extinguished.
Yeah. And, you can tell by some of the photos that his mother had released that he had swag. I think the one photo where he has the colorful tie on, you could tell that he was a man about style. I mean, being from Chicago, I mean, they know how to dress in Chicago, even at that period of time. So he was definitely somebody with swag. One of the things that I always wanted to know about Emmett was the difference between the raising in the North as opposed to the rules that were in the South. And I know that, many of his family members, as you already said, had migrated up to the Chicago area. But in Money, Mississippi, there was some unwritten rules. Do you know, based on how the family has talked, did he know some of those unwritten rules in Mississippi, or had he not experienced that because of the difference in the North?
His mother tried to share that with him. His cousins tried to share that with him. But when you're, have the world, at your fingertips, if you will, Emmett heard it. He knew what some of the rules were. She told him about looking down, stepping off a sidewalk, how he would address, white people at that time. And so, he heard about it, but he had not experienced it. And that's a different thing. And so cousins who were with him at the time, Reverend Wheeler Parker, who was a witness to his kidnapping, Simeon Wright, also a witness to his kidnapping, and God rest his soul, he's no longer with us. But, they described, just, his perception of things. So at one point, they admired his view of the world, his view of what hope and education would look like. And on the other hand, they tried to share with him what their life was like. But again, they sort of cross dreams, if you will, and I'd say perspectives, where they wanted, that, go to the amusement parks. They wanted to have fun. Emmett wanted to experience picking some cotton. He wanted to experience, what their lives were like, jumping into a river, jumping into a pond, you know, um, just living free, which was not his experience in Chicago, right?
Mhm.
So, you have that wonder of what life would be like. Both of them did, those that had the rules and understood what it was like, and then Emmett, who wanted a little bit of that, not the horror, not the tragedies, not the murders, not the Jim Crow South, not the white supremacy laws, but he wanted that freedom, that sense of freedom as well, because there was that in both, instances, and they both wanted to experience it.
Okay.
I-
So, Keandra, I know you wanted to ask some questions just from a
yeah.
mother's perspective. So go ahead.
So one of the things that I heard you mention was his personality. And I want to talk a little bit about how that might have played a role as far
Can't hear
as
Keandra. I'm sorry.
You can't hear her?
you can't hear me.
Not.
Okay. She was asking sort of about his personality and just how he interacted, with his mother, because I think a lot of African American women who are mothers now are kind of trying to figure out, what that relationship was like in that before this horrific tragedy. Because we saw the strength of his mother over the years after he was unfortunately lynched. But before that, what was that like?
And a part of that I want to,
Like
oh,
any
sorry.
mother, she was protective of him, loved him, cared for him, wanted him to experience things. Uh, but because of the love of our family and the protection and the movement even of our family, the family reunions, the coming together, the care, the love, I think, in a bubble, if you will, that's kind of how he was raised. But he had the wonderment, of a big city too. He had the experience of that. So, as any mother would, try to teach them the rules of life, and that's what she did. And from my cousins who actually lived with them, they had um, similar experiences as well. We had families that lived with each other. Some lived on the upper level, some lived on the lower level, some lived in the same community across the street from each other. So, in a sort of unusual way, our family was sort of surrounded by family and protected by family. And so he had that fortunate bubble and circle of care and love around him. Now, is that representative today of mothers? Some, but we've kind of expanded out, from same communities. But some of that is still gold today. We need to think about how we replicate some of that in protecting, families. But as a boy, she wanted him to, have friends. She wanted him to do well in school. So, she wanted him to be responsible. Those were things that she did like any, typical mother. Now, 1955, of course, and being a single mom, and she was, really good friends with my grandmother, Josephine, really good friends with her. So they shared in similar I guess teachings and just how they were in the world, trying to explore in the world as a single mom, you know, um, uh, looking for other opportunities. And Mamie was attractive, smart, and was exploring life, as well, but then also, protected, had the protection of her family. And then, of course, that was a protection for Emmett as well.
So a part of that I want to get into is just thinking about him as a mother myself and having a 14-year-old son right now myself. I know, and I'm a single mom, so I know that there are things that he can't even conceptualize would happen to him because he's so used to mommy protecting him and shielding him from that. And one of my goals as a mother is to allow my son to just be a kid, right? And so it sounds like when I hear this story that he was raised in a space where he was allowed to be a kid, and that played a part in ultimately his death because it sounds like his personality or him just being goofy, him just being silly, or maybe not being able to fully grasp how dangerous that environment was. I think that played a role that led up to his death. So that's the part about his personality I want to talk about, how He grew up in an environment where he had the space to be who he was. And then he comes into this environment in Mississippi where you're not a person if you're Black, you're not a human.
Did you hear what she said?
Unfortunately, I did not. I don't know if the
She was
microphone.
talking about his personality and how he was raised in a way, in a place where he could be a child and he could be silly, and then he could experience the world, and then ultimately being placed in a situation in Mississippi where maybe that nurturing environment kind of led to his not understanding the nuance of the Mississippi Black codes that may have led to his demise. And did you think that played a role?
I certainly don't want to blame Emmett for the hatred, um, the kind of retaliation and the environment of the South. Um, many of us have experienced, the South, and had some level probably of resistance, at that time, but not one. We're talking 1955, and I don't think he could ever imagine um, what that innocent whistle, would do. Now the others around him certainly did. As my cousin Wheeler would say, he made a beeline. They made a beeline out of there. Going down that dusty road, in their car, trying to get away as fast as they could. But I just can't put that responsibility necessarily on him. And I know a lot of people like to find out, well, why did that? I think the question is for the Jim Crow South, the white supremacy, the white citizen council. That's a great question for them. Is he may not have known all those rules, followed all those lines, but certainly whistling should not have been a death. But
No, absolutely, yeah, absolutely not. And I think that what we're trying to do for our listeners is to paint a full picture of, because again, with the exception of a few people, most of us were not alive in 1955. And so some of us weren't even thought of, but we're trying to get them to fully grasp what it would have been like in Chicago at the time and then Mississippi at the time, and how someone who grew up in Chicago would not conceptualize deep backwoods Mississippi in the 50s.
yeah, and unfortunately, I was a toddler, at
Yeah.
the time, raised in Nebraska. So when we migrated from Mississippi, they came to Chicago, California, Nebraska, and other places, across the country, Boston, and other places, getting away from that. So just imagine too, it was not fathomable for us, unfathomable for us to even understand, what would happen. But um, I would say that Wheeler Parker, who was a witness to it, he said he said it has said oftentimes, like, reckless eyeballing would get you killed. You
Mhm.
know, saying yes, sir, yes ma'am, or no ma'am, or no sir. These are things that we have moved away from, right? And so there are parallels, though, to certain things that we do today that cause suspicion, that can get people killed, where you can't even imagine. So there's still some parallels from past to present, and hopefully we won't take those into the future, but there's still those things that can happen. A Trayvon Martin, for instance, challenging someone that's following him, he ends up being shot,
Mhm.
right? Killed. So there are so many parallels to these unimaginable things, or things that we don't understand why these murders occur, similar to Emmett. But I would say yes, it's hard to imagine that um someone's visiting your home and you know, someone comes to the door, kidnaps them without any resistance, right? You know, some of my family members have questioned that as well. It's like, okay, how could that happen? Even those right in Mississippi, you know, had a differing opinion of why Emmett was allowed or why there was no resistance to their understanding to Emmett leaving the home. So there's those, the Smith family didn't understand how Emmett was allowed uh, to 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 leave the home. But there was something that Mose Wright said, and it was customary then. Now we can't imagine this today, but that they would take him out, they would teach him a lesson, whip him up a little bit, and send him back. That was their expectation because that was customary. Those were things that were happening then. So, what are parallels today? You know, some of the police violence, right? Goon Squad, and others, you know, whip them up, you know, maybe, you know, we're not murdering them or to the degree, but that is happening, right? That is happening today. So there's just some unimaginable things that happened then. The rules, the mores that they had at that time, similar today, you know, driving while black. I mean, there's some things where we are caught in this, I'd say, spiral, you know, of racism that, you know, has caged us in a way. But because of resistance, because of Mamie standing up, because of the civil rights uh, laws that were in place that we fought for, have opened some of those doors. But we're just not where we should be in this country.
Absolutely. And
So
one of the things I wanted to shift us to, because we spent a lot of time and necessary time humanizing him, but I do want to shift into what actually happened to him. So we talked about he came down early in August of 1955 to visit family members, and around August the 24th of 1955, they went to the Bryant Food and Meat Market, and he was in the meat market when allegedly he had an interaction with Carolyn Bryant where he whistled at her, and that led to everything. Can you kind of talk us through why they went to the food market and then what happened after they left the food market?
They went, you know, there were stores, you know, far and wide, you know, in the area, and that was a place where uh, Bryant, the Bryant store, served the sharecroppers there. Um, you know, it was even a place where they gathered, if you will. And so after picking cotton, you know, they decided let's go to the Bryant store, let's get candy and things, and you know, get ready, you know, for the evening. And so you know, there was other opportunities for entertainment and things like that, but they, you know, any of us, you know, you go get ready, you know, for the evening, they stop by the store. And so while they were in the store, you know, one of my cousins went in with well went into the store, bought some things, but as he was exiting, Emmett went in, and he was in there for maybe about a minute just alone. And then the other cousin went in, and after Emmett has purchased this thing, there was no incidents at all that occurred. Not what Carolyn Bryant had testified, you know, that he grabbed her, made sexual explicit, you know, advances towards her. None of that happened. But what did happen, though, he exited the store, they exited, and as she came out, because you know they engage with a lot of the sharecroppers, a lot of the men and women that were their customers, and so she came out of the store, and at that time, I guess they were leaving, going to their car to exit, and Emmett somehow turned around and whistled at her. Okay, and they made didn't make any time, you know, exiting and leaving the premises. And so after that, you know, they went to town, you know, another, you know, part of in Sumner, Mississippi, or in the Delta area, you know, for entertainment and such. and nothing happened. Went home, after going out for the evening, went home, and then went back picking cotton the next couple of days. But then on the 28th, about 2:30 in the morning, Roy Bryant, J.W. Miles, and some others appeared at the home, um, looking for, and some say looking for the fat boy that was doing the talking, right?
And let's
And
let's kind of stop right there, because one of the questions that I have kind of starts right there. So the home that Emmett was visiting, of course, was in the black part of town in this town, right? Where he was
well,
staying.
the Delta, so it's a sharecropper's land,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So
So
wouldn't they have had to come through that particular part of town and others would have seen them at that point?
uh yes, and they had others with them, you
That's
know
that's where I'm going. So
yeah.
is it true, or do you know? Because you said that there was J.W. Bryant and the other gentleman, and then particularly possibly Miss Bryant. But isn't it kind of been out there that they may have had some African Americans with them as well?
Yes,
Okay, can you talk
yes.
about that a little bit?
Later in the investigation, when the case was reopened in 2004, there had been a filmmaker by the name of Keith Beauchamp that uh, became very much interested in the case, and having met me before she died, and just establishing a relationship with her, decided to pursue this. And so, leading up to 2004 and his investigation, he spent a lot of time in the Delta area and identified, I think, up to 14 other people that may have been involved. And most of them were, or some of them were African Americans. About half of them were African American. He has interviewed them. There is a documentary called The Untold Story of Louis Till, where he identifies most of them. And that caught the attention of the FBI, and they decided to reopen the case. The case was reopened in 2004. Um, Mamie, of course, unfortunately had passed in 2003, January 6, 2003. Uh, Case was reopened in 2004. Investigation took place with the FBI. The case was handed over to the DA at the time, Joyce Childs, an African American woman. They did interviews. They talked to some of those people. Some most denied, that there. They asked for immunity, didn't get it. And so some of the story and their involvement is a little bit complicated. But Keith Beauchamp in The Untold Story of Emmett Till has eyewitnesses that identified, some of the people in some of the FBI records, and some of those are unredacted now that identify who were maybe suspected to be a part of it. One gentleman is now the mayor of Glendora, Mississippi, which is part of the Delta area. It was his father that he identified was possibly a part of the abduction and the murder of Emmett. Because, Emmett was taken some 30 or so miles around in the Delta to approximately 3 different counties. So when you think about Emmett's case in Mississippi, he was abducted in, the uh, he was abducted in a county, the name of the county. He was abducted in that county. I'm sorry, he was abducted in LaFleur County. I do know this. He was
Mhm.
abducted in LaFleur County. And then he was taken to Sunflower County, where he was beaten in Drew, Mississippi. And then his body emerged in Tallahatchie County. So can you imagine an investigation taking place then with these different counties 3 different sheriff's departments having to decide how they were going to pursue this case. We're not, they're quite about the case yet, but think about that. So you've got people in these different counties. Some were witnesses that were brought to bear. This is where Medgar Evers and the NAACP were involved, along with TR and others. There had to be a inspiration to bring to bear this murder, trial for J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant. But here's the thing. To fast forward just a little bit, when the investigations were opened in 2004, closed in 2007, reopened again in 2017, closed again by the DOJ in 2021. In 2022, and for years before, we had heard there was a warrant for the arrest of Carolyn Bryant, but it was never served. So that meant Carolyn Bryant, and this was a warrant for the kidnapping.
Mhm.
So Carolyn Bryant had to be identified to be on a warrant. This is a white woman in 1955 associated with Emmett's kidnapping. So she was culpable back then. So we have heard these stories about Carolyn, heard these stories about this warrant for her arrest, but it was never served and never found. It was never it never served, if you will. So some of us, I'm gonna fast forward this a little bit for you, but we went to the LaFleur County Courthouse. We knew, of course, again, he was kidnapped in LaFleur County. He was beaten in Sunflower County, and then his body emerged in Tallahatchie County. And in Tallahatchie County is where the murder took place. So no one gone to LaFleur County to look for that warrant. We did in 20 found the warrant for the Carolyn Brown, and spent about a year or so demanding that warrant be served her because she was still alive. She was still alive. So again, 1955, these 3 counties, right, involved, witnesses, NAACP, the help and support of local, the trauma and the terror brought upon people that remained in this year, the trauma, nervous breakdowns. One of the witnesses, had that eventually he left and went to. So although we we think, okay, it's, it should have been cut and dry, but we know that the J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant actually in 1956 they confessed to the murder of Emmett, but because these laws that were in place at the time, or laws that weren't in place at the time, there are no civil rights laws in 1950, and because of Emmett's murder in 1957, we think that he was the impetus for the civil rights, at least in the laws in 1957. But one of the things that I think we struggle with as a family, because we're not lawyers, but we're trying to follow the law, and we hope that this new evidence, this warrant, we found the lower level, Flour County Court, in an hour and a half, we found in a and it was my daughter's fiance who found it, actually, or five of Keith Beauchamp, the filmmaker of the Till movie, one of the filmmakers there, and the story of Emmett Till. There was me, there was one of our ambassadors, Lisa Ernest, and then Rashid, who was our attorney, Jaribu Hill, who, right, human rights attorney, right, was supposed to be meeting us, but we found uh, had arranged like 3 days. Give ourselves 3 days to go through, go on the lower level of the courthouse. We did an hour and a half. Chris, this file had never been opened, and so after the case closed in 2021, December 6th of 2021, with the FBI met with some of our family in Chicago, Chris Clark and the current FBI investigator and the Northern District of the Department of Justice in met with that family. They excluded some members who were really asking some specific questions. So those families, including myself, and our attorney, met with the Northern the next year, 2021, and demanded that they use some of the evidence from even the 2004 reopening of the case. Use that evidence, and there's no new evidence. There's nothing. We have to come up with something, and we came up with something. We came up with this unserved warrant, demanded the warrant served, demanded that the new had been there a while. Richardson, along with the local police, served that warrant, and they ended up having a quick grand jury, no true bill. Carolyn Bryant died a year later. We did pursue a writ of mandamus against those that we didn't see are doing their job. We also we had about 300,000 or so signatures petition Justice Emmett Till campaign, that we started. So we support of the country, some other organizations to campaign. Fortunately, the state of Mississippi, the Department of Justice, we feel that we got the attention that we should have received, or the amount of diligence, around Emmett's case, abilities of Carolyn Bryant with kidnapping, and there was no statute on that.
You said there's no statute limitations on kidnapping?
Well, there's no. Let me correct myself. There was no statute limit, or no. In terms of the warrant itself, the warrant had not expired, and in Mississippi, someone dismisses it, and I can't remember the actual technical term, but that warrant was still alive, and so it could have served to Carolyn. Now, would Carolyn have jail? We don't know. We just wanted that piece, that to right one of the wrongs that we think was committed in 1955. They served because they couldn't find the county, and also we got where they didn't serve had young boys. Emmett was a young boy that was killed, and so his life didn't matter to any of them, in Mississippi, but his life mattered to everybody else across the country. It mattered to our family, and so we not, pursuing justice, and we're still to truth, justice, and accountability. And unfortunately, Carolyn Bryant died in 2003. We had hearings set, to take a look at the warrant evidence that we had surfaced, and it was 1 month. Our date was 1 after Carolyn Bryant
passed away. Okay, so I guess one of the questions that I have, and of course, we recognize that Carolyn is the original Karen because of the allegations that she made. That ultimately, isn't it true that at some point she recanted the story that she told with regard to Emmett making sexual advances and doing those type of things?
No.
Oh, okay.
At Duke University that wrote a book called Blood of Emmett Till. And in his book, and he interviewed her, I think maybe like 2007, but it came out in 2017. And I know I kind of jumped around in the timeline, the 2004 when reopened, and it was reopened again in 2017. Well, that was the reason why that the case was reopened, because when he admitted or stated that she recanted, and this is appearing in his book and notes or whatever that he had, it became an interest of our family. You were like, finally, she's talking to somebody, and finally, she's saying that this all was a lie. Well, the FBI, of course, got the attention of their investigation, their interviews. Carolyn denied that she that kind of conversation with this professor, and denied that she recanted her story, and she stuck to the lie. That Emmett, made those sexual advances towards her. They could not corroborate what he was saying was happening, and what she said to him, with any tapes, with any documentation that he, I think, claimed that he had. Timothy Tyson is the person, and he appeared on a lot of radio shows, TV shows. It made a big splash, and he was wondering, well, why are people so interested in this? The book is about other things, the history and the climate and things like that. Why is this just so insatiable, an interest to everybody at this heightened level? Well, I don't think that was a real question on his mind, but I think he knew, that it would probably sell more books. And I don't have anything against Timothy Tyson, but not prove his claim. And she denied vehemently that she recanted her story. And there are two, and if the viewers and those that are listening want to know more about it, we can post these things on the Emmett Lewis Till, or the Emmett Till I was going to say on one of our victims recovery.
But you can put it on the website or the social media.
We could probably put it on our social media. That would probably be the best place for it. And we have Justice for Emmett Till. We have Emmett Till Legacy Foundation pages as well. But there are stories, and there are reporters, investigative reporters, that questioned this as well, that uncovered it as well. And no one could find that she recanted her story. So I went. So one couple of the things that really, a lot of our family members, if you see cousins and others that are out here speaking, we want the truth told. We want the myths, to go away. We want the truth told. We want to be held accountable, and we want all the lies, to be, to have people like yourself, challenge some of those things that occurred, and like I said, I was a toddler at the time when it happened, but we, I talked to my relatives. I talked to some of the witnesses that were there. Wheeler, is still alive. He's a reverend. He's a minister out in Argo, Illinois, at the church where our family members started. And so one of the things I do want to say about Emmett too, he had a strong religious background, Church of God in Christ. So there was a lot of faith in, was surrounding love, faith, good spiritual foundation. He loved the Lord as well. And so his mother did, our family as well, still do, and so those are some tenets, and I think some strongholds, that are in our family that keep us moving and have this hope, and looking forward.
I think Keandra might have a question she wants to lift up.
I hope I can hear her.
Yes.
Are you able to hear me? I don't think she
And
can.
I cannot.
She still can't hear me.
Okay. Well, I think
So
that one of the things that our listeners really want to know, and you kind of covered quite a bit about the case, is, is there still a way that justice can be achieved for Emmett? I mean, I know that Carolyn Bryant has passed on, but there have been other cases in the past where even with the last defendant passing on, that a public viewing of the evidence has led to some semblance of justice. Have they thought of anything like that, or is that anything like that in the works?
Yes. We definitely, through the foundation, there are a lot of things that we do. One is we commemorate the dates, Emmett's birth. We ask people to wear black and white on that date, pause for a moment of silence at noon, and say his name and think about the other lives that have been stolen. We repeat that on August 28th, which is the date that Emmett was lynched. And we travel to on some that 30 or so miles. We do the Till Trail of Tears and Terror. So we ask the public to join us on those commemoration dates by wearing the black and white, coming along with us to the Till Trail of Tears and Terror, experiencing from authentic voices of family who've been on this journey for justice, for these years, trying to walk into the shoes that Mamie and the footprints that Mamie left for us. But we also are looking at policies. We are looking at other families. We were a part of the, helping to get the anti-lynching law, passed uh, in America, and then, which, now it's a federal law, for lynching that was what uh, 200 attempts, 100 years, to get that passed. Um, and then looking at how, oh my gosh, how we move forward with educating others, sharing the story, joining us, asking loved ones, about their experience and those that are part of the Emmett Till generation. Um, but as you question about other ways, yes, we are can't speak specifically about it, but we
Okay.
there were that there are, in many ways, this case was derailed. And so it is of interest to us, our family, uh, who, when, how, and why. And so we are thinking really intently and strategically about how we get those answers. Others have suggested a tribunal. Some have suggested hearing of some sorts. Others have read the transcripts, publicly. But from our family's perspective, and being given the charge that Mamie gave me, and what I took to heart is about this justice journey, is that I think if we uncover those things, it'll help others that are pursuing this. Again, there's the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crimes Act that was passed. Um, and we got that reauthorized in 2016, which means that the federal government can work along with local government agencies, helping them with whole case investigations. There's about 136 of those now. These are families you may not even heard of. So we want the public to at least take a look at some of those families, like Wallace Jackson Jr., like Johnny May Chappelle, and many others. And there is a list of those families on the Department of Justice site. But those cases can be investigated up through 1979. The provision for it, I believe, expires this year because we did get it reauthorized in 2018 before Obama left office. And it was like a 10-year window because there was um, about $10 million a year that was assigned to it or budgeted towards it for, when there's a fiscal note that's associated with a bill, that they have to have a sunset. And
Hmm.
so wanted it to be permanent, but it does go through 1979 and it may expire this year. And I've got to talk to some others about it. But again, when you think about Emmett, um, when you think about, the journey, we just don't want you to think about just the tragedy. We want you to think about, um, the laws that have been, enacted, the civil rights movement that I think the impetus, with Emmett's case, the standing up, so the sitting down, so we could stand up. Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks thought about Emmett, Emmett's mother and her courage. We recognize other women who have similar courage. Um, we've done this a few years, and just last year we are recognizing and have recognized about 18 women. And this is probably our sixth Women of Courage Awards, where these women have exemplified the kind of, let's say, the kind of courage that Mamie had. That is just, it is. How can I describe it? We have a really good description too, and we're going to do a call for nominations here really soon. But it's that extraordinary, unexpected, if you will. Mamie provided the blueprint for others, even, to stand in their dignity, to use their voice and use resources that are available to them to pursue truth, justice, and accountability for their.
Absolutely. I think Keandra's back. Let's see if she
I
can.
am. Can
Can
you
you hear
guys
her?
hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I cannot.
Okay.
Oh,
For Mike, I think I was having the issue with you initially,
Uh-huh.
and she's such a strong warrior, and I want to hear her. I want everybody to.
oh, thank you.
I hope.
Yes. Yes.
I do. So
Go ahead.
if it's
Well,
okay, Griggs, I'll kind of just give you what my take is, and you're doing a really good job of translating. Sorry, we got you playing translator, but I do feel like this is so important that we haven't spent much time on yet, but we can't talk about this case without talking about how dangerous one white woman's lie was. And it's not just any woman, it's specifically a white woman and white women tears in this country. And this is something that is still affecting people to this day, specifically Black men, young Black boys. It is affecting Black people to this day, how we prioritize the feelings and comfort of white women. I'm personally, as an activist, seeing that trickle down into my work today. So I can't imagine living in the Jim Crow South. So I do think we need to spend some time talking about what that looks like, what it looks like now, and what it looked like back then, and just what her take is on how one white woman's lie was able to essentially turn the entire country upside down.
so what she said was she wanted to delve deeper into the nexus of Carolyn Bryant's lie that turned the country upside down, and how that still is affecting activists and young Black men and young Black women and everyone, in a way that the lie and the tears of one white woman could shift the whole conversation of a nation. She wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
I think in what you just described is something that we've all experienced, and it's something that still impacts today, unfortunately, with the continuation, and the through line is something we just need to speak out about. We need to call it out, something that um, Bernice King said a year or so ago on a panel at the Operation Hope, Hope Global Forum. And she said, when we hear something or experience something, we need to call people up and call them in, and not just call them out. Now, I believe all three are important, but it still happens today. One of the things that we experience when we were pursuing this justice for Emmett, we heard a concern. And one of the concerns was, okay, if we serve this warrant to Carolyn Bryant, what are the optics? I'm like, she gets handcuffs like anybody else, we're a warrant for their arrest, you know. So we're still concerned in this century about the optics. And I think those at high levels in our government are concerned too. So as Bernie said, call them in, call them up, but I say call them out as well. But in a way where we can set the expectations that these are things we're not going to accept, that have every right, to expect fairness, expect equity, expect that, we are treated, based on the laws of the country. And those things need to be challenged as well, because those are hurdles, with the statute of limitations and others, that have challenged us and been barriers for us and so many other families. But I'd like to repeat this conversation, because I really think that this is an important one. Your questions an important one, and I think it's one that we need to contemplate. How do we overcome this sense of the optics, this sense of white women's tears, this sense of anything a white person says, that's more believable than something that we say, the expectation that we're guilty, before any explanation, that our color, has provided, a pathway towards uh, violence, and we have one way that we're dealing with some of this in with the work that we're doing is looking at historical trauma, looking at generational trauma, and how our health and wellness, and how racism has been a public health issue, and some of that is because of these assumptions, that are made about us. And so we need to recognize from a health perspective what that does to our body, what that does to our minds, what that does, from a generational perspective. And so we were able, just, in Minnesota, to get a bill passed because of this, because I live in the epicenter of George Floyd, Dante Wright, Amir Locke, Philando Castile, um, that, we see the trauma, and we know how, where they're activists and families engage, and how we're to move through these, this jungle, if you will, of justice, that there's so many barriers, but our mental health and our wellness is at stake. And so we got a bill passed called the Emmett Till Victims Recovery Program, because it's about recovery. Maybe not so much reparations, but when I can go and sit with a therapist who can help me, deal with challenges from a health perspective, or understand that my health and my, whether it's high blood pressure or other things that face our community that are, we over index, in many instances from a health perspective, a lot of the ills, we carry that in our DNA, we carry that along with us. And so we were able to get $500,000 allocated um, towards health organizations, health and therapists, and others, maybe even some healers and others, in the community, that were able to sit down and provide these services for impact. Now that's ended. They only funded it for 1 year, but say that can't happen on a national level. And
That's
that's
a
the
great
next
idea.
frontier that we're looking at. There needs to be some recovery resources so our families and others and our country, what we're experiencing today, there's so much trauma that we need to be on a journey towards recovery, a healthy recovery, so we can continue to stand up not only for ourselves but for others as well.
Absolutely. Keandra, you about to say something?
I said that's an excellent idea, but she did touch on one of the things that I was actually going to ask, and actually just commend you and your family, Miss Watts. I can't imagine, I know I have my own family trauma, but I can't imagine having that sort of trauma marking my family. So I wanted to hear her talk a little bit about what it was like to just grow up in a family that is so shaped by that trauma, and also commend them for turning it into something that is so powerful. But I do want to hear what was that like growing up, just in a family like marked by essentially the catalyst to the civil rights movement.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So what she asked was, and we know we just spent some time talking about trauma and how to deal with trauma in informed um, assistance. But her main question was basically, what was it like growing up in a family whose history was shaped in such a traumatic event that basically was the catalyst for the greatest movement that we've seen in, I mean, 250 years basically. So how did y'all channel that trauma into a movement?
Ooh, great question. Mamie led the blueprint for us. And as she stood in front of audiences, as she stood shoulder to shoulder with NAACP, with other leaders, Jesse Jackson, God rest his soul, and others across this country, along with Coretta Scott King, and along with other mothers of the movement at that time, she laid a blueprint, as far as I'm concerned, for, using her voice, using her presence, um, and having expectations that the right thing would be done. And so we couldn't escape that um, that challenge, and that opportunity to do something quite similar and to look for ways that we can make an impact, that look for ways that we could as she poured into the lives of other young people, she started something called the Emmett Players, where she lost her only son, but she poured into lives of others, and she used Martin Luther King's speeches and taught them to recite those in public, traveled across the country with them. And these are attorneys today. These are men and women that are doing some tremendous things in our country. But as a family, we have no other choice, but to stand tall, to figure out how to be a part of solution, not to dwell on tragedy, but look for triumphs. And I think we have some. We have some where we found the warrant for the arrest for Carolyn. We have been a part of um, implementing and advocating for laws in this country that have impacted other people's lives. We're looking at the truth, justice, and accountability. We're exposing people to the tragedy that happened with him. But we hope that we can inspire them as we continue to stand, as we continue to speak out, that we can inspire other mothers, the Valerie Castilles, the Amir Locke's mom and dad, George Floyd's family, and others that we have locked arms with, the Oscar Grant family, and many others, that, you know, we could be a part of inspiring or with our loving from the inside out. It has spurred ideas of other mothers have, women's empowerment symposiums. And we started that in the honor of Mamie Till-Mobley, recognizing the courage of other mothers. And now other mothers are, not that we started it, but I think we've inspired others to do something similar. Now, in many instances, do we have the resources that we need to make it happen? Not all the time, but do we have and are part of this club that no one wants to belong to, that we can lock arms with some of those and hold when the public goes away, to hold them up. Those are the things that keep us standing. Is it perfect? No, but is it something that gives hope and gives us an opportunity to use our skill sets, our lived experience, to move things forward in this country? And so we just hope that we've been an inspiration, to others, to attorneys, to activists, to journalists, which is what Mamie did. When you think about that blueprint, that's what Mamie did. She brought these people together, and they figured out a way to move her initiatives forward. And we're trying to continue that as well. There are monuments now that are in Emmett's name. There's the National Museum of African History and Culture, where you can see his casket. You know, there had to be permission by our family members to have Emmett's body exhumed, for that investigation, right? Because they didn't believe it was Emmett's body. But now that casket, that original casket, sits sits in the National Museum of African American History, in a beautiful area that the director Lonnie Bunch has established there. That's a sacred space. But one of the other things that we are a little concerned about, and that is, Emmett has become an economic engine for Mississippi. And so, as it relates to just when you heard about the recent findings of the KKK logs, uh, the hood and
The notes.
of theirs and the notes and those, that's being delivered to a museum, right? The gun that murdered Emmett was displayed at a museum. The place Emmett was beaten and murdered in Sunflower County is now, it brought about $1.5 million to the landowner there, where now that's going to be converted to some sort of a memorial, if you will. So Emmett's name, only from tragedy to triumph, but it has become an economic engine in a place where he was murdered. And our concern is that large landowners there, as we are memorializing these locations, these important sites and locations, we're concerned that the perpetrators' families may be benefiting. And so we'd like not that not to happen, but because of how we're moving in this country with memory and memorials, it's happening in Mississippi, so those are concerns. We're not trying to block progress at all, but that's a concern of ours, that Emmett doesn't become, profiting off of the family's pain
Right.
is that has been a constant in our country. But who profit, is a major concern. So,
Exactly. And so we kind of wanted to shift the show and just kind of talk about how the media was a catalyst to this and how that can be translated into present day justice. So, what type of advice would you have considering, as you just stated, this particular case and Mamie Till-Mobley was the blueprint for many families that came after your family? To be able to use the media as a catalyst to get public attention and to make sure that a horrific situation was highlighted and moved forward.
yes, well, it takes journalists who are willing to tell the truth, who are willing to not be the story, but share the story. And it takes investigative reporters too, who can dig a little bit deeper. And so all of those things, and those people, in 1955, um, rose to the occasion. But it also took politicians, who were interested in being part. But these publications that um, wrote the stories, that shared the pictures, that covered the funeral, that covered the trial, photojournalists that covered the trial as well, they helped to tell the story from 95 that no one, I mean, I don't think the public was ready for it. They had to be ready for it because its mother demanded it, right? And so Jet Magazine, which I think is what you're showing, Jet Magazine was able to show his picture. Beautiful picture before and horrific picture afterwards. They were able to identify and put faces, to the names of things, of maybe newspaper articles that you were able to hear about. Mamie actually traveled across the country also speaking and collaborating with the NAACP and some of the unions and other organizations. So, but can you imagine a young mother, 1955, doing all that? Where did she get the stamina to do that? But it took unity and this village of individuals to surround her and to actually trust, because she gave them permission. She gave them permission to tell the story. Now, she didn't give them permission to capitalize off of the story, which is what Look magazine did with uh, the gentleman that wrote the article that got confession from the murderers. Uh, but that was the trust. That was the power. She used the power of and the resources that were out there, and we're able to bring that together. So those are things that you see mothers doing today. You see Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon, which I forgot to mention her earlier, and I love her. But you see them walking in the same, in those same footsteps, if you will, using that blueprint because it worked back then. Even the civil rights, the um, March on Washington looked at the number of people that were at Emmett's funeral, and Bayard, Rustin, and some of the other organizers, like, we need that kind of, just build up, of people and a movement like that. And so they looked at August 28th. And so you found August 28th, that was the same date as the March on Washington, the same date that Emmett was murdered. So that date has become very significant. And so remembering August 28th, remembering Black August, remembering those dates, I think help us move things forward because we can always refer, to some significant things that happen, the mobilization of others, or, looking for jobs, looking for, economic security, looking for voting rights. Those similar things can hopefully be replicated even today, and some are. But just answering your question, those powers that I think that still work today. We still have media, but those courageous, um, I think, journalists who are not a part of the story but want to tell the story, those investigative reporters that are digging deeper, pulling back some of the layers, like what you're doing today, asking, wonderful questions that, allow us to think maybe a little bit deeper about what's happening and not just sharing a story, just sharing some of the glossing over the details. It challenges all of us, challenges our community, those that are coming after us, those that have gone before us, which we still need to tap into because they carry so much forward that we need to replicate today. So, but maybe I just applaud for writing to the president, even after tried to use the laws that were available at that time, and that was the kidnapping of oh god, Lindbergh. I think it was Lindbergh kidnapping.
You talking about Lindbergh's baby when that baby disappeared?
Yes. So
Yes.
she even just use that analogy. My baby's been kidnapped. Let's bring the force of America on Emmett's case. Not even thinking that they weren't thinking about Emmett Till. They tried to ignore her, right? But with the courageous, Black press, the Chicago Defender, the tri-state defender, including Memphis and others, they collaborated. They moved, together to expose, to amplify, and to make sure that this story was told. Dr. Ernest Withers was the photojournalist that put together a little booklet that he sold for $1 that had the picture of Mose Wright pointing to the murders, which was the first time in this country that a Black man had pointed to in a courtroom the white people who were responsible for Emmett's death. So there's so many things, to look at this case, bringing that blueprint forward to today, and not just leaving it in the past. I always just say the past is not past until justice is served. But don't just leave Emmett's situation or his case or his story in the past. It is today. It's still relevant today. It's still relevant. Well, those similar things are happening. They just have to kind of, they've been nuanced a little bit. Words have been changed a little bit. Like you said, the Carolyn is now the Karen, and I still call them the Karen. What
Good
they
point.
are.
Good.
But
So I wanted to kind of lead us into the wrap. The question I have, and you kind of touched on it, and I wanted to unpack it a little bit more. Given the now movement in the law to compensating individuals for their name, image, and likeness, has the family proceeded in a way to protect the name, image, and likeness of Emmett Till? Because there are certain names in the Black community that are, reach that pinnacle, and many of them owe that ability to Emmett's case. So has the family moved with their attorneys to carve out and make sure they protect the name, image, and likeness of Emmett as we can continue to move forward in this justice movement?
Well, there are family members that are part of the estate, and they have done some things in that arena. Um, the federal government, from the monuments perspective, the National Park Service has done some things around naming Emmett Till, Mamie Till-Mobley national monument. There's 3 right now in the country. Um, there are certain assets that we each have, families have, that we are protected from a licensing, perspective. Um, but I'll just say this, that that name, image, likeness, of course, even with athletes and all, this is sort of a new age, thing. But with the pictures that Jet Magazine has, with the stories that have been told, the documentaries, the Till movie, and others, there are things that have been done to protect, how can I say, the interests, of certain family members. But Emmett's name and all those things there are a lot of things in the public um, over the years. And I'll just say this too, that your question is one for other impacted families as well. And we are, I'm working with um, some attorneys are looking at, how do they secure those things? There's some families that, had to go back, King family and others had to kind of go back and secure some things, and looking at that as well. But these other families need to be, because these laws are in place now, and some of this is a new frontier as well. But we're impressing upon them to make sure that their assets are secure, that pictures and images and things like that are secure. So it is one where those resources, legal resources, are needed to assist. And those are the things, part of the Emmett Lewis Till Victims Recovery Program. That's one of the tenets, not just health, wellness, but also resources, for memory and for protecting, the assets and name, image, and likeness.
Absolutely. And so, my last question would be, and it kind of goes with the whole theme of this particular podcast, Justice for the series. What would justice look like as it relates to Emmett Lewis Till and the family's pursuit of justice? What would that look like, and how can our audience help get there?
Yes, well, I can speak for me, my family, those that are part of Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. Um, and they're, as we all have large families, right? So
Yes.
I was sure that, um, this is representative of the work that we're doing, the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation, which we are all family members. But what it looks like for us is truth. It looks like for us is the myth being dispelled, that our authentic voices are used, and not just, and I'm not downplaying historians and others, but at a table, some family members need to be a right as we move forward in that we are at the table as well, as we uh, move forward with securing our assets. Thing. Uh, in addition to that, I think we touched on too, and that understanding, really understanding and peeling back how this case became one that was so insurmountable in terms of where the and that it became so um I mean, how can I put this? I say we did feel defeated um when we had information that could have at least pushed some things forward. Um but justice looks like, truth, accountability, dispelling the myths, and being able to impact other families so that they are not facing the same barriers that we faced, and be a part of policies that can move justice forward for other families, uncovering those things in areas like some of the statute of limitations, which some of those laws don't protect us; they protect interpreters. Um, some and laws that are literally barriers for us, but challenging those things. Hosting the hearing, you know we where we can this was derailed. Who, how, and what, and when was this derailed, so no other family has to face the thing that we face. Having the resources to continue some of our initiatives, to do our till trip there, to do our commemoration, to make sure that we can pour into the lives of other people, as Mamie, that we can help them with their advancement, with our scholarships. And then also looking at how we continue to share the story. We're looking at opportunities to share screening of the Till movie, The Untold Story of Emmett Louis Till, our recall Emmett Till. So we're always open, to do that. So as we can use our voice, share the truth, talk about justice and what that looks like for us, as you asked, and then seek accountability, because it's not done yet. We know that it's still an open question, and we want to make sure that we get that resolved.
Well, I thank you for that. And I will kick it over to Keandra for her final thoughts, and then I'll close us out.
Okay, appreciate you, Greg. So there's one thing that earlier in the episode, I want to be intentional about clarifying something, because we had a breakdown, like she wasn't able to hear my question. And this is something that we're putting out to the world, right? So I want to make sure everything we're putting out is clear and intentional and respectful. So I do feel like I need to clarify earlier when we talked about his personality, and we're talking about whether or not he knew the social norms and essentially the rules in the environment in Mississippi, was not so much to blame Emmett Till. And I want to be intentional about saying there is never a justifiable reason to harm a child, let alone murder a child. There's nothing he could have said, done, anything about his personality that could have justified that. But there is something to be said about the way this system attacks Black people for just being human. And I do think that there's something to unpack there. Maybe not in this episode, but I just wanted to be intentional about saying, we would never place blame. At least that's not what we're doing here. I know I've seen some weirdos on the internet maybe doing that, but I want to be intentional about saying that our focus is to talk about the system and the way that the system is harming Black people. So I think it's important to clarify that. But I also want, again, to just commend her for the way that they've turned that trauma into power, and also ask if there was a simple first step somebody could take if they're impacted, as she put it, by a social injustice or a violation of civil rights, or God forbid, a loss of life. If that's my family member, what's a first step I can take?
And so she wanted to just tell me what she said, wanted to clarify what she had said earlier, as to not make it seem like that at any point we were blaming Emmett for anything that happened to him based on not knowing a social norm. And then her final question was, for any families that are out there that are impacted the way your family has been, or the ones that you work with, what would you say is that first step that they can take towards getting to justice and accountability and lifting up their loved one's case?
Hmm. I wish there was one first step. There's so many, and I'll tell you, talk to these other families. There's so many things that are happening at one time. This is the most unusual situation to be in. The first thing that they look at is how they're going to handle their loved one, how to humanize them. That's the first thing that from just our experience and even the questions that you asked initially were about humanizing. People need to know who their loved one uh, was and what they represented. That's number one. But again, there's all these other things happening at one time. I wish there was just one, but that first, I would say, along with the others, they cannot forget that, and they do. They have been doing such a wonderful job, in doing that. The second is finding, the legal resources that they need. Someone that is willing to listen, willing to take it on. Many of these cases are complicated. Many of them are against, police, against the authorities, and finding the right authorities, police, excuse me, not police, sorry, but the right resources, legal resources that can help them handle not only whether it's criminal, case, also civil as well. And then at the same time, to your question about name, image, those are things they have to actually from the jump. That usually is the last thing that they think, but it's the first thing others are thinking. Mamie, and the reason why I say this is because Mamie, William Bradford Huey, and there were some others that, Mamie had scripts for movies handed to her. Um, this is before I would, as I've described it before, Emmett's body was cold.
Hmm.
So there's this hunger or this part of the industry, if you will, that hungers for how they benefit, right? And I hate to say it that this is what happens. It happened with Mamie. It happened with her. And so still happens today. Others that are looking for their um, uh, as part of the tragedy that these loved ones face. So there's this eagerness though to share the story, that someone wants to hear the story, share it, and they make themselves available to them, but they need to have a good team around that understand how industry of our pain works. And I'm calling it an industry. It is. There's profiting off of our pain. But um, understand that some of that, as Mamie did, benefit, the story getting out there, the story being amplified at the same thing to push back and take advantage of or being clear. I'm gonna put it that way, being clear about doing truth, justice, and accountability. And that is probably consistent with all of these other, well, truth, who their loved one was, but about what actually happened. And then looking at justice, and some define it differently. They can't come back, but they can define it from whether it's a criminal case, those being responsible, perpetrators getting what they're supposed to get, being charged, having the truth told about their loved one and the situation that happened, and then also accountability, no matter who it is. Not thinking about the op, if you will, and making sure that they have the resources to help. But
Absolutely. And I just want to end there because I think you kind of summed it up. And for all of our listeners, I think you need to understand that there has to be a team around a family because nobody wants to navigate some of the things that you're going to have to go through in this justice journey. So I appreciate you for lifting it up. I also want to personally thank you as a fellow warrior in the social justice space. I just want everybody to know on my platform and this platform, it's because of the work of your family that I am a civil rights attorney. Let's just be clear about that, because it's certain things that have happened in our community that changed the trajectory of African American history. And so there's a book that I want everybody to read who's watching this. It's called Bus Ride to Justice. And that is the book by Fred Gray, who's one of the seminal civil rights lawyers. And he details in the book what Deborah has already said. Many people talk about why Rosa took the seat and didn't get up. But in the book, and also in Rosa's book, it outlines specifically what she was thinking about on December the 1st, 1955. She was sitting on the bus. She was thinking about the image in Jet magazine of Emmett's brutalized body because of the courage of Mamie Till-Mobley to put that photo in the Jet magazine. So again, Emmett Lewis Till is the through line for the civil rights movement. Full stop. And we just heard something that many didn't really know. August the 28th, the March on Washington symbolized that date and that period, which is a through line. So for the families that want a blueprint, the blueprint is Emmett's case. It's Emmett's case. Mothers of the movement who want a blueprint, it's Mamie Till-Mobley. For all of the families that are out here thirsting and seeking justice, this family is still on the road to justice and will get there because they have impacted generations. And so I just thank you for just taking the time to come on this podcast. You know, it's an honor of my life to even hear more of the story that impacted my life and many other civil rights lawyers. I know Thurgood told the story, reading his book. Fred Gray tells a story. Ben, my good friend, tells a story. Lee tells a story. Harry tells a story. Your family affected generations of activists and lawyers. And I will rededicate myself on this platform to seeking and getting justice for Emmett Lewis Till. So I appreciate you. I just want to lift your family up because they deserve it. I want to make sure that people can see Emmett's smiling face in that I call it Chicago suit, because the tie producer, because you put up the tie. Look at how the tie hits on that shirt. That is the face that we want people to remember in this justice movement. Not the face that was in the Jet magazine, but the face of that young man and the courage of this mother of the movement to shape generations. And so on behalf of freedom fighters everywhere, we just thank your family. We thank you. And I'm going to kick it over to Keandra to take us out.
Thank you, Griggs. And again, as he said, we appreciate you. I cannot imagine the responsibility to be a part of such a legacy, but we appreciate you and we commend you for having that sort of courage. And we appreciate everybody else who is listening. And again, you have the blueprint. So until next time, this has been Justice For.
What do you want?
Every headline fades. Every news cycle moves on. For the families, it never ends. And the fight for accountability continues. This is not about clicks. This is not about controversy. This is about the truth. The names that deserves justice. We are reopening and examining the files and the facts. Nothing more and nothing less. We're going to ask questions that people dare to ask. Because justice delayed does not mean justice denied.
Don't shoot!
So when you can't fail me.
This is Justice for